Now, I want to give you an opportunity to answer on the record to Ms. Kamlager-Dove's question. I know you said it's garbage, and it may be, but I really think you need to say the word no into the record so that you can clear that up.
I think the ridiculousness of this and the tabloids that you are quoting and referencing are insane. And this has been
So that's a no?
something that I've refuted for years, and I continue to do that.
So it's a
what
no.
I would tell you is
we
when
can move on. Hold on.
what you're
Madam Secretary,
doing,
we can move on. I'm not going to belabor it. If it's
this is what you do.
Hold on.
Socialist,
I'm not doing anything.
Liberal left is you go off and you attack conservative women and you say that we're either stupid.
We begin today with the exact moment a cabinet secretary decided the law did not apply to her. The Secretary of Homeland Security sat before the United States Congress. She was asked a direct question about who is actually running her federal department. She gave a direct, one-word answer. But the evidence now shows her answer was completely false. This is not about politics. This is about the forensic evidence of deception at the highest levels of the federal government. This is about accountability. United States Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem claims that Corey Lewandowski has no role in approving government contracts at her department. That is a lie. That is a measurable, provable, undeniable lie submitted directly into the official congressional record. We must define the exact parameters of this lie. We look at the exact words spoken. During a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal asked Kristi Noem a very specific question.
Mr. Chairman, you're claiming my time. You were asked by Richard Blumenthal yesterday. You were asked by Richard Blumenthal yesterday if Corey was involved in approving contracts. You said no. Do you want to correct that?
What I would say is that he has an advisor to the Department of Homeland Security, has no decision-making authority.
Madam Secretary, do you want to correct it, yes or no? You don't want to correct it? Fine.
No decision-making authority,
hold
no
on.
role in
Not a
contract.
problem. According to one of the FEMA administrators that you fired, there is nothing, including contracts, that is brought to you that he hasn't reviewed. In fact, a significant amount of DHS internal routing documents has his signature on it above deputy secretaries. Okay?
He asked whether Corey Lewandowski has a role in approving contracts at the department. Secretary Noem gave a one-word answer. She said, no. She did not qualify the statement. She did not express confusion. She just said no. The next day, Representative Jared Moskowitz confronted her in the House Judiciary Committee. He reminded her that she was asked by Senator Blumenthal if Lewandowski was involved in approving contracts. He asked her if she wanted to correct her previous testimony. He asked her for a simple yes or no. She refused to say yes or no. She stated that Lewandowski is an advisor to the Department of Homeland Security. She stated he has no decision authority and no role in those matters. Representative Moskowitz also asked her to say the word no into the record regarding allegations of an intimate relationship with Lewandowski, asking her to clear that up. She refused to simply say the word no. Instead, she defined the allegations as tabloid garbage. She called the references insane. She claimed she has refuted the rumors for years. She defined the questioning as an attack on conservative women by the socialist liberal left. She claimed they were calling her stupid or a slut. She stated that she is neither. When pressed by Democratic Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove about whether she was sleeping with her subordinate, she again claimed she was shocked that the committee was peddling tabloid garbage. She defined Lewandowski's authority by stating he is simply a special government employee. That is the exact claim. That is the stated defense.
Okay, but this is it. This was the report. It was 122 pages, the original draft report. You and Corey Lewandowski then took the report and made it 23 pages. You cut out all the stuff that was put in by governors who had been through disasters, emergency management directors, FEMA experts, national security experts. You cut it all out. It's all gone. That's why the report's not been released. It's sitting in the White House trying to figure out this mess that you created. So instead of getting the recommendations we need, now we have nothing. You've called Corey Lewandowski a special government employee. I understand what government means. I understand what employee means. Okay.
That is the lie we are dismantling today. We now turn to the forensic evidence. We use only the sources provided in the record. We look at what the evidence proves. We look at what the evidence does not prove. We begin with the reporting from ProPublica. ProPublica reported that Corey Lewandowski has indeed signed off on contracts at the agency. ProPublica did not guess. They cited both former and current employees inside the department as their direct sources. Representative Moskowitz brought direct testimony from a fired FEMA administrator into the hearing. This is not an anonymous source. This is a former administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. According to this administrator, there is absolutely nothing, including government contracts, that is brought to Secretary Noem that Corey Lewandowski has not reviewed. The evidence proves that a significant amount of internal routing documents at the Department of Homeland Security bear the direct signature of Corey Lewandowski. His signature appears physically above the signatures of deputy secretaries on these official documents. This forensic evidence proves he has operational command over federal contracts. It proves her statement to the Senate was false. The evidence also proves Lewandowski exercises terrifying personnel control. The former FEMA administrator was not fired by Secretary Noem. The evidence dictates that he was fired by Corey Lewandowski. Lewandowski called the administrator into the secretary's office. Lewandowski then forced the federal administrator to submit to a polygraph test.
That former FEMA administrator wasn't fired by you, the secretary. He was fired by Corey. It was Corey that called him into your office. It was Corey that made him to submit to a polygraph test. The $100,000 spending rule that you created that comes to your desk, you're not even sitting at your desk. It's Corey who's sitting there. ISIS said the Republicans should be happy at the job that you're doing. Really? You're looking at the person who single-handedly took the president's signature core issue, immigration, the issue that got him elected from 59% to 39%. 200 miles of border walls being held up by you. They had to bring in Tom Holman, pull out of Minnesota.
That is what the evidence proves about his power. The evidence also proves massive operational failures under her command. Representative Moskowitz, who previously ran the Category 5 Hurricane Michael recovery as the Director of Emergency Management for the state of Florida, provided the data.
Well, you're looking at the guy who ran that response. I was the Director of Emergency Management for the state of Florida. For a Republican governor, I worked with the Trump FEMA administration during the Category 5 Hurricane Michael recovery. That Trump's FEMA was great. We got expedited reimbursement, a program that you got rid of or threatened to get rid of. And the Panhandle had one of the greatest responses after that Category 5 storm. The president said he wanted to reform FEMA, but that's not what you did. You've basically destroyed the agency. Largest FEMA backlog in the history of FEMA. My state of Florida is owed $2.5 billion.
Under Noem, FEMA has the largest backlog in the history of the agency. The state of Florida is owed $2.5 billion. She delayed FEMA disaster declarations even when applicants met the strict statutory threshold under the Stafford Act. She threatened to cut the EMPG program, which grants states funding to build capacity. In the Texas floods, she failed to put urban search and rescue crews on the road for 72 hours. Days later, the FEMA urban search and rescue chief resigned in direct protest of her actions. She hired 2 people as administrators with absolutely no FEMA experience. The department is now on its 3rd FEMA administrator in 14 short months. This turnover has never happened in the history of the department. The evidence proves she delayed the beginning of the FEMA Council. The White House canceled her last council meeting and held up the release of the report. Representative Moskowitz obtained the original draft report from fired FEMA employees. The original report was 122 pages long. It contained vital information from governors, emergency management directors, and national security experts who had survived actual disasters. The evidence proves that Secretary Noem and Corey Lewandowski took that report and slashed it down to 23 pages. They cut out all the expert advice. Representative Moskowitz entered a massive stack of evidence into the congressional record to prove this chaos. He entered a Vox article titled, "The Mess That Kristi Noem Made." He entered a Time article about Noem's spending rule causing delays at Homeland Security. He entered a Politico article about a vote to overhaul FEMA being canceled after a leaked report. He entered a ProPublica article stating Kristi Noem misled Congress about her top aide's role at DHS. He entered a Hill article showing Trump approval rating on immigration at a record low. He entered a Wall Street Journal article about a pilot fired over Kristi Noem's missing blanket. He entered a CNN article describing how Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's Gucci bag was stolen under her chair. He cited a New York Times article noting late night is distracted by Kristi Noem's oversized hats. He entered a Time article showing some Republicans joined calls for DHS Secretary Kristi Noem to step down. The evidence proves she labeled the deaths of 2 United States citizens, Renee Good and Alex Priddy, as domestic terrorism. They were shot by federal agents. Video evidence directly undermines her claims. Despite the video evidence, she declined to retract her words. What the evidence does not definitively prove is the absolute sexual reality of her relationship with Lewandowski, because the evidence relies on journalistic reporting rather than legal admissions. The Daily Mail reported uncovering evidence of a romantic relationship. They reported observing their intimacy during flights on donors' private planes and stays at luxury resorts. The New York Post quoted an anonymous source who saw them making out at a conservative political action conference in Orlando. Conservative news site American Greatness claimed to have multiple sources confirming the sexual relationship in 2021. NBC News reporter Julia Ainsley describes the relationship as an open secret in her forthcoming book. But the documentary evidence firmly proves his shadow control over the federal government. We must analyze the power and control dynamics for each piece of evidence. This is a story about the absolute corruption of executive power. The Wall Street Journal reported that Noem received her job as Homeland Security Secretary specifically because Corey Lewandowski lobbied Donald Trump and his top aides on her behalf. He used his political power to install her. In return, she granted him unparalleled control over her federal department. The evidence shows she actively wanted to make him her official chief of staff. The White House vetoed that decision specifically because of the rumors of their alleged affair. When the White House blocked his formal appointment, Noem circumvented the President of the United States. She gave him the vague title of Special Government Employee. She used this title to subvert institutional control. She then created a specific department rule stating that any spending over $100,000 had to come directly to her desk. She centralized all financial power. But Representative Moskowitz pointed out that she is not even sitting at her desk. Corey Lewandowski is the one sitting there. He holds the power to review every contract. He holds the power to sign routing documents above deputy secretaries. He holds the power to call federal administrators into the secretary's office and fire them. He holds the power to subject federal employees to polygraph tests. This is unelected, unconfirmed, unconstitutional power. She acts as the public shield. He operates as the shadow secretary. She also uses her power to control the narrative of human lives. When federal agents shot and killed Renee Good and Alex Preddy, she used the massive power of the Homeland Security podium to label them domestic terrorists. She used her power to criminalize dead citizens before the facts were known, and she refused to yield that power even when video evidence proved her wrong. People observing this dynamic believe government officials are enriching themselves and powerful donors. They believe Lewandowski has been influencing the situation from the beginning. We must examine the strongest defense argument presented by Secretary Noem and then dismantle it entirely using the law and the sources. Her strongest defense regarding Corey Lewandowski is the defense of legitimate advisory delegation. She argues that he is legally designated as a special government employee. She argues he is merely an advisor who has no actual decision authority and no role in approving contracts. She argues that any questioning of this arrangement is not oversight, but rather insane tabloid garbage. She argues that asking these questions is an inherent attack by the socialist liberal left against conservative women. Regarding her false claims about the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, her strongest defense is the defense of the fog of war. She insists she was simply trying to provide factual reports based on the immediate input she received from agents operating in highly chaotic situations. We dismantle this defense right now. The defense of legitimate advisory delegation is completely destroyed by the forensic reality of government operations. A special government employee does not sign internal routing documents above Senate-confirmed deputy secretaries. A volunteer advisor does not have the legal authority to call a top FEMA administrator into the secretary's office and terminate their employment. A volunteer does not have the authority to administer polygraph tests to federal officials. The defense that this is all tabloid garbage is dismantled by the direct reporting of ProPublica. ProPublica relies on actual former and current employees of the Department of Homeland Security. Representative Moskowitz entered this reporting directly into the congressional record. You cannot claim a story is tabloid garbage when the sources are your own fired administrators. Furthermore, the defense that she is simply protecting conservative women is a rhetorical shield designed to deflect legal scrutiny regarding the misuse of taxpayer funds. Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove dismantled this perfectly when she stated that a federal official should be able to answer clearly and without hesitation if they are sleeping with their subordinate. Finally, the defense of chaotic input regarding the domestic terrorism label is dismantled by the existence of video evidence. If you receive chaotic input, you make a mistake. But when you are presented with video evidence that proves your input was wrong and you still decline to retract your words, you are no longer making a mistake. You are making a deliberate choice to lie. We turn now to the legal education necessary to understand the gravity of these violations. I will explain this in plain English. The federal government operates on a strict chain of legal command. The The Stafford Act is the specific federal law that dictates the statutory thresholds for disaster declarations. When a state like Florida experiences a disaster and meets those legal thresholds, the federal government is legally obligated to release emergency funds. Deliberately delaying those declarations and holding back $2.5 billion is a subversion of federal disaster law. Furthermore, federal contracting is governed by rigid procurement laws. Only authorized, legally designated federal contracting officers can sign off on the expenditure of taxpayer money. A special government employee functioning as a volunteer advisor cannot legally usurp the authority of deputy secretaries to approve contracts. Doing so violates the core principles of federal acquisition regulations. When a cabinet secretary testifies before a Senate or House committee, they are under a strict legal obligation to tell the truth. Making a materially false statement to the United States Congress is a serious violation of federal law. When Senator Blumenthal asked a direct question about Lewandowski's role in contracts, Secretary Noem gave a definitive answer of no. If documentary evidence and sworn testimony prove that Lewandowski does approve contracts, that answer is a false statement under the law. Finally, utilizing taxpayer funds, government travel, and federal offices to facilitate or conceal a personal relationship with a subordinate raises immediate legal questions regarding the misappropriation of public resources and ethical violations of the highest order. The public believes she is using taxpayer money to fund her personal affairs. They believe her answers alone deserve serious consequences. As a prosecutorial analyst, my professional judgment on the responsibility and fitness of Secretary Kristi Noem is absolute. She is completely unfit to hold the office of Secretary of Homeland Security. She has taken a department responsible for the safety of the American people and turned it into a personal fiefdom. She has systematically gutted the Federal Emergency Management Agency. She created a catastrophic backlog of disaster relief. She left highly trained urban search and rescue crews sitting idle for 72 hours while people drowned in Texas floods. She drove away expert personnel, cycling through 3 FEMA administrators in just 14 months. She allowed a volunteer operative to shred a 122-page national security report down to 23 pages. Her management of the border is a catastrophic failure. Noem is a key figure in Trump's immigration strategy. Representative Moskowitz correctly noted that President Trump's approval rating on immigration plummeted from 59% to 39% under her command. 200 miles of border wall construction sit stalled and held up by her own department. She had to bring in Tom Homan to pull out of Minnesota. She is, without question, the weakest cabinet member. She refuses to take responsibility for her actions, choosing instead to play the victim when confronted with basic oversight. She refuses to retract false statements about the deaths of American citizens, proving a devastating lack of moral character. She allows her staff to be terrorized by polygraph tests administered by an unconfirmed advisor. The public reaction supports this judgment. People are demanding accountability for the alleged misuse of public funds. People believe she should be removed from office and investigated. Critics say she appears unprepared. They call for justice for Cricket, the puppy she killed, a point highlighted by the lapel button worn by Representative Moskowitz during the hearing. As the congressman stated, the country needs a national divorce from her on biblical grounds. We do not make these judgments in isolation. We rely on an impenetrable stack of expert authority. We rely on Representative Jared Moskowitz, a sitting member of the House Judiciary Committee and the former Director of Emergency Management for the state of Florida, who successfully managed the Category 5 Hurricane Michael recovery. His expertise in disaster response is absolute. We rely on the investigative reporting of ProPublica, a highly respected organization which secured the testimony of current and former Homeland Security employees. We rely on the reporting of the Wall Street Journal regarding the lobbying efforts that secured her cabinet position. We rely on the journalistic record entered into the Congressional Committee, including Vox, Time, Politico, The Hill, CNN, and the New York Times, which documented the canceled votes, the spending rules, the delayed declarations, and the internal chaos of her tenure. We rely on the direct statements of a fired FEMA administrator who experienced the shadow structure firsthand. We rely on veteran Washington reporter Julia Ainsley of NBC News, who documented the open secret of this relationship in her upcoming book. We rely on lawmakers from both sides of the aisle who have universally criticized her aggressive tactics and her baseless labeling of citizen deaths as domestic terrorism. This is a complete consensus of legal, legislative, and journalistic authorities demanding answers. The institutions designed to protect the American public from this exact type of corruption have fundamentally failed. The White House attempted to exercise institutional control by vetoing Corey Lewandowski's appointment as chief of staff due to the rumors of the affair. But the White House failed to enforce that decision. They allowed Secretary Noem to bring him in through the back door as a special government employee, rendering the White House veto completely meaningless. The Department of Justice has failed to intervene, despite overwhelming evidence presented in open congressional hearings that an unconfirmed volunteer is exercising illegal authority over federal contracts and personnel. The Department of Justice has not publicly moved to investigate this shadow management. The federal courts have not yet been engaged to stop this behavior. Congress is attempting to assert accountability. The House and Senate Judiciary Committees are holding hearings. Members of Congress are publicly exposing the lies. Representative Moskowitz even handed her a Coast Guard blanket to replace the one she lost, while wearing a lapel button demanding justice for her murdered puppy, Cricket. But a previous impeachment effort against Secretary Noem completely failed, demonstrating the partisan paralysis that protects her. The institutions are currently failing to produce immediate compliance. They are struggling to contain an executive branch official who simply ignores the rules. We focus only on the procedural consequences. There is no hope offered here. There is no hype. There is only the mechanical reality of the federal bureaucracy. Democrats in Congress are currently withholding department funding pending necessary changes to the aggressive immigration enforcement practices. This withholding of funds will force a procedural showdown over the basic budget of the department. The congressional committees will continue to compile the official record. The public testimony regarding the fired FEMA administrator provides a direct roadmap for further congressional subpoenas. Congress possesses the exact procedural power to subpoena Corey Lewandowski directly. They possess the power to subpoena the internal routing documents that bear his signature above the deputy secretaries. They possess the power to demand the results of the polygraph tests he ordered. The massive FEMA backlog in Florida and the delayed disaster declarations will trigger further mandatory statutory oversight hearings under the rules of the Stafford Act. The hearing highlighted challenges Trump faces, as his immigration policies may impact Republican chances in upcoming elections. If Secretary Noem continues to provide sworn testimony that directly contradicts the documentary evidence regarding Lewandowski's authority, she faces the imminent procedural threat of formal criminal referrals from the committee to the Department of Justice for making false statements to Congress. The public believes indictments could come from these investigations. They are calling for restrictions on lobbying groups and political donations. She will be forced to return to these committees. She will be forced to sit in that chair. She will be forced to answer these questions again. The record will be built page by page, document by document, until the procedural weight of her misconduct forces a final legal or legislative resolution.